Humans were not assigned to Ward 6 because they were trusted. They were assigned there because the ward had begun to fail in a way that did not register as an emergency. No fires, no riots, no dramatic loss of revenue. Just a quiet erosion in satisfaction metrics that could not be explained by staffing levels, amenities, or environmental controls. Contracts were fulfilled. Clients returned. Residents remained compliant. And yet, something was slipping through the system's fingers. Ward 6 was a pleasure-adjacent district, though no one in administration liked that phrasing. Officially, it housed interpersonal specialists, companions, emotional facilitators, cultural performers, long-term intimacy contractors. Beings whose work revolved around attention, presence, desire, and reassurance, things the consortium understood only as outputs. Those outputs were declining, so they sent a human. Mara Valen arrived on a civilian shuttle at third shift, when the ring's inner light band dimmed to a soft amber, and most residents were between obligations. Her transfer file was thin, intentionally so. Humans with long histories tended to make administrators nervous. She carried one medium case and wore practical clothing that did not attempt to flatter her body. She was not young by most species' standards. Her hair, cut just below her jaw, showed the first honest threads of gray. Her movements were unhurried, economical, the posture of someone who had learned how to exist in her body without apology. The intake officer barely glanced at her. "Human support liaison," he read. "Temporary placement." "Yes," Mara replied. "You'll be assigned quarters near the central corridor. You are not to interfere with contracted activities." Mara nodded. "I won't." The officer hesitated. "Unless directed." Mara met his eyes, calm and steady. "Unless invited." That earned her a flicker of discomfort, which he covered by stamping her badge and waving her through. Ward 6 greeted her with silence. Not the absence of sound. The ring was alive with hums and distant machinery, but the absence of warmth. Voices were subdued. Footsteps avoided lingering. The air smelled clean in the way places did when no one stayed long enough to leave traces of themselves behind. Mara paused in the central lounge. It was a beautiful space, curved seating, soft lighting calibrated to soothe most known nervous systems, a wide viewport showing the slow arc of the ring's inner structure, light sliding across polished metal like a second sky, and it was empty. She didn't log that observation. She didn't need to. She took a seat, not to wait for someone, just to be there. It took nearly 20 minutes before anyone entered. She heard her before she saw her, the faint brush of fabric, the hesitation in the doorway that suggested someone deciding whether to cross a threshold. Mara didn't look up right away. She let the moment breathe. When the woman finally stepped inside, she did so with practiced grace. Luri was Keshari. Tall, elegant, warm-toned skin marked with faint bioluminescent tracery along her collarbones and temples. Her movements were fluid, her expression composed, her posture flawless in the way of someone whose body had been trained to be desirable and safe. Her eyes, however, were tired, not exhausted. Not broken, just dulled. She noticed Mara instantly. Humans stood out in Ward 6, not because of appearance but because of density. Humans took up emotional space even when they tried not to. Luri stopped a few paces away. "You're new, yes. You're human, yes." Luri's mouth curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. "They only send humans when the metrics don't make sense." Mara leaned back slightly, open posture, palms resting on her thighs. "Then the metrics probably don't make sense." That earned her a sharper look. Luri studied her the way one might assess a client, but something in her gaze faltered, as if she couldn't quite find the role she was supposed to play. "You're not assigned to me," Luri said. "No. Then why are you sitting here?" Mara met her gaze gently. "Because this room felt lonely." The bioluminescent patterns along Lurie's skin flickered, betraying a spike of emotion she did not mask quickly enough. "That's not in your job description," she said. Mara smiled faintly. "Neither is most of what humans are good for." Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Finally, Lurie exhaled and sat carefully at a distance that preserved both professionalism and escape routes. "You shouldn't say things like that," she said quietly. "People start expecting things." Mara nodded. "That's usually how trust begins." Lurie looked away toward the viewport, watching light slide across the ring's interior. "Trust is not part of my contract." "No," Mara agreed. "But exhaustion is." That did it. Lurie laughed, not brightly, not performatively, but with a soft, surprised sound that cracked something open inside her. "You're dangerous," she said. Mara shrugged. "So I've been told." They sat together for a long time after that, speaking only when words felt necessary. Mara didn't ask questions that would require Lurie to perform. She didn't pry. She didn't analyze. She stayed. And in Ward 6, where everything was timed, measured, and exchanged, staying without demanding anything in return was the most disruptive act imaginable. When Lurie finally rose to leave, she paused. "You'll still be here tomorrow," she said, not quite a question. Mara met her eyes. "Yes." Something in Lurie's posture eased. "That's new," she said softly. She left without another word. Mara remained seated, watching the empty lounge slowly reclaim its silence, but this time the silence felt different, less hollow, less final. Somewhere in the ring's systems a variable had shifted, not efficiency, presence. And Ward 6 had no idea what to do with it yet. Mara did not seek Lurie out. That was the first mistake the ward made in trying to understand her. Every other support specialist logged outreach, scheduled check-ins, initiated contact under the careful language of wellness protocols. Mara did none of that. She followed her normal pattern. She arrived early, stayed visible, and let the ward decide when to approach her. Humans called it availability. The system called it inefficiency. 2 days passed before Lurie returned to the central lounge. This time she did not hesitate in the doorway. She walked in as if she belonged there, not as a performer, not as an asset, but as a person who had decided where her body was allowed to rest. She wore loose clothing rather than presentation silks, her bioluminescent markings muted to a soft glow instead of the calibrated brightness clients preferred. Mara noticed all of it. She said nothing. "You didn't move," Lurie said, sitting across from her. "I wasn't finished being here." "That's not how schedules work." Mara smiled faintly. "No, it's how people work." Lurie studied her more openly now. "They haven't given you parameters. They rarely do. And you're not afraid of overstepping." "I'm very careful about that," Mara said. "I don't step where I'm not invited." Lurie's fingers tightened briefly on the fabric at her knee. "Then you should leave." Mara didn't move. She didn't challenge the statement either. She only tilted her head slightly. "Do you want me to?" The question landed differently than Lurie expected. Not as a test, not as a trap, as a real choice. "No," Lurie said after a moment. "I want you to stay." Mara nodded once. "All right." They sat in silence again, but it was no longer empty. It was weighted, charged with awareness, with the unfamiliar sensation of being seen without being evaluated. Lurie broke it first. "You don't look at me the way others do." Mara considered that. "How do they look at you?" Lurie's lips curved, practiced, like a solution. "And how do you want to be looked at?" The bioluminescence along Lurie's collarbone flared, then dimmed. "Like I'm allowed to want something too." Mara felt that land low in her chest. "You are," she said simply. The first touch came an hour later. It was not dramatic. No sharp intake of breath. No sudden pull toward heat. Lurie's hand brushed Mara's wrist when she reached for her cup, fingers lingering just long enough to ask a question without words. Mara did not pull away. She turned her wrist instead, offering her pulse openly. Lurie's breath hitched. "Is this," she began, then stopped. Mara waited. "Is this permitted?" Lurie finished. Mara's voice was low, steady. "Only if you want it." "I don't know what I want," Lurie admitted. That S allowed too. The contact remained, warm skin against warm skin, a quiet circuit completed. Lurie's bioluminescence shifted, spreading in soft patterns that had nothing to do with performance calibration. The ward's ambient sensors flickered, confused by readings they had never been programmed to interpret. Nothing else happened that day, and yet everything changed. Lurie slept through her next rest cycle for the first time in months. No dissociative drift, no waking panic. When she returned to work, clients noticed the difference immediately, not because she gave more, but because she no longer disappeared afterward. Others noticed too. A youth companion named Sorrel asked Mara, carefully, if she could sit with her some time. A pair-bonded facilitator lingered after a session, unsure why they didn't want to return to their quarters alone. Even staff who had nothing to do with intimacy began passing through the lounge, staying longer than necessary. The ward began to orbit Mara without realizing it. Administration noticed within the week. They sent a query, polite, neutral, edged with concern. Mara was asked to clarify the nature of her interactions with residents, particularly Lurie. Mara answered honestly. "I listen, I wait, I respond when invited." This did not satisfy them. They requested boundaries. Mara agreed to boundaries she had already been respecting. They requested metrics. Mara gave them none. What she gave instead was continuity. The intimacy between her and Lurie unfolded slowly, deliberately, without secrecy but with privacy. They spoke about desire the way others spoke about weather, something that moved through them, something that could be felt without being controlled. When they finally undressed each other, it was not urgent. Lurie traced the lines of Mara's body with reverent curiosity, fingertips lingering on scars, on softness, on places where age had left its quiet signature. Mara kissed Lurie's glowing skin slowly, learning the language of light the way one learned breath. There was no performance. There was no transaction. When they came together, it was with care, hands guiding, bodies adjusting, pauses allowed. Lurie shook afterward, overwhelmed not by sensation but by safety. "No one ever stays after," she whispered, pressed against Mara's chest. "I will," Mara replied. "As long as you want me to." Lurie believed her. That was the most dangerous variable of all. By the end of the month, Ward 6's metrics had improved dramatically. Not satisfaction scores, retention. Residents extended contracts voluntarily. Burnout reports dropped. Incidents of dissociation during sessions declined to near zero. The ward was quieter, but not empty. Administration called it an anomaly. Mara called it what happened when people were allowed to want without being punished for it. And somewhere deep in the ring systems, alarms failed to trigger because nothing was breaking. The review did not arrive with alarms. It arrived as a calendar notification, neatly formatted, non-urgent, impossible to ignore. Administrative presence required. Ward 6, operational clarification. Mara read it once, then set the slate aside and finished her tea. Lurie watched her from the edge of the sleeping platform, bioluminescence dim in the way it always was after intimacy, not exhaustion but satiation. She had learned the difference in herself only recently. It still startled her. "They're going to ask you to stop," Lurie said. "Yes, to leave, probably." Lurie's glow spiked, sharp and bright, then steadied as she drew a controlled breath. "If you go, this will collapse." Mara turned to her then fully. "No," she said gently, "it won't." "You can't know that." "I do," Mara replied, "because it already lives in you." That was the part the system never understood. Humans did not create dependence the way machines did. They created transfer. What Mara had done, what humans always did when allowed, was teach people how to carry what they needed inside themselves. The review chamber was immaculate. Neutral light, neutral temperature. 3 administrators, none of them human, arranged in a way meant to discourage intimacy of any kind. Data streamed in soft projections around them, numbers rising and falling in patterns that pretended to be meaning. Mara Valen, one of them began, your presence has resulted in significant deviation from expected ward behavior. Yes, you have exceeded your liaison mandate. Yes. You have formed personal attachments with residents under your purview. Mara did not deny it, with consent, with care, without coercion. That is not the concern. Mara leaned back slightly. Then state the concern. A pause, then, you have altered the emotional economy of Ward 6. Mara smiled faintly. That's a poetic way to say people stopped breaking. The administrators did not smile. You cannot remain, one of them said. Your contract will not be renewed. Lurie, standing at the edge of the chamber, felt the words like a physical blow, but she did not speak. She had learned something else from Mara too. Wait, listen, choose your moment. Mara nodded. When do I leave? 72 hours. Good, Mara said. That's enough time. For what they did not ask, they should have. The last 3 days were quiet. No announcements, no confrontations. Mara did not rally the ward or argue with administration. She spent time, real time, with people, sitting, talking, holding hands, teaching nothing explicitly and everything implicitly. She reminded them how to ask for what they wanted without apology, how to say no without fear, how to touch without taking. She did not frame it as a legacy. She framed it as practice. On the final night, Lurie came to her room without knocking. I don't want this to end, she said. Mara took her hands. It doesn't. You're leaving. I'm moving, Mara corrected. There's a difference. Lurie swallowed. Then choose me. Mara smiled, soft and fierce all at once. I already did. They made love that night with a tenderness that carried grief without being ruled by it. No urgency, no desperation. Just bodies memorizing one another, mapping what would remain even in absence. In the morning, Mara packed. She did not take much. At the dock, Lurie stood with others from the ward, not in protest, not in performance, but in presence. People who had once believed themselves replaceable now stood openly, unafraid of being seen wanting something more. Mara paused at the threshold. You're staying, Lurie said. Yes. And I'm staying too, Lurie added, but not the way I was. Mara reached up and pressed her forehead gently to Lurie's. That's all I ever hoped for. The shuttle doors closed. Ward 6 did not collapse, it shifted. Residents continued to choose connection, boundaries held. Care circulated instead of draining away. Administration struggled to model it, but they could not deny the outcome. Retention remained high. Burnout stayed low. No replacement program succeeded in undoing what had taken root. Months later, a new directive quietly circulated through consortium space. Human assignments, extended presence recommended. Where emotional load is non-negligible, no explanation. No apology, just an admission, buried deep in policy language, that some problems could not be solved by distance, efficiency, or control. They required someone willing to stay. Somewhere else on another station that was quietly failing, a human arrived with a small case and an unremarkable posture. And somewhere inside a system that had never planned for it, care began again. Because humans were not efficient. They were not optimal. They were not easily replaced. They stayed.